Are you using OAuth properly? That is what we're gonna learn in this video, and if you heard me talk about OAuth, you know that OAuth is for authorization delegation. However, most of the times it is actually used for authentication, external authentication, which is not a proper use case for it, which is why OpenID Connect was invented. In this video, we're going to build an app that is going to have its own authentication, and then we're going to go to YouTube to obtain some YouTube tokens and then store them in a database. Welcome to the Raw Coding YouTube channel. My name is Anton. Let's go ahead and dig in. Here's our application and it is pretty much empty. Let's go ahead and start adding authentication to our application, which is just going to be regular cookie authentication, right? Auth is about extending your application. It is not about being able to delegate authentication to your users. We'll call this cookie authentication, and because I've already done this like a gazillion times, I'm probably gonna cut here. And voila, maybe a little bit more of a novel way to sign in, not using the HTTP context, just using the results to sign in. But we have the claims principle. We are signing in for the cookie authentication schema. The cookie authentication schema is the identity provider, and all we have is just a user ID for the claim. Now let's run the application. Because we're going to be setting up auth, I want to, trim my routes. So let's go ahead and remove everything from the launch config and just leave the HTTPS with port 5005. I'll grab this address for later reference, but most of the time today I'm going to be debugging because we want to be inspecting state and what is actually happening. Here's the application. We have no cookies, and if I go to the login method, hopefully it should come as no surprise. We get authenticated, right? We're already masters at this. Perfect. Now I have two additional tabs open over here, one for the YouTube API, one for the credentials. And as any other client, I'm going to need to create some kind of credentials. This is going to be an auth client ID. What kind of application am I setting up? It's a web application. Google considers a web application something to have a server-side backend. I'm gonna say it again for those who never heard this before. If you're rolling a SPA, if you don't have a backend for your application and you're like, man, I want to get the token in my browser, forget about it. If you want to be secure, you need a server-side backend to store the tokens. Don't let the tokens go in the browser. Therefore, we have a web application here. I'm just going to name it like a YouTube tutorial. No authorized JavaScript endpoints and redirect URIs. If you haven't watched my auth video, go ahead and watch that. But here we're going to go to auth YTCB. So auth YouTube callback. That is where we're going to go back to exchange our authorization code. After I create this client, it's going to give me a client ID and client secret. I'm going to put those into some constants and then I'm going to reuse them. Okay, so the client is created and I have my secrets file over here, which contains the client ID and client secret. Coming back to program.cs, let's drop down this menu over here and we're going to start with adding auth and in parallel building our endpoint where we are going to try to call YouTube, but understand that we have our application and we're extending our application. So we are trying to fetch some additional information because that is what our application does. It integrates with YouTube. We'll put this on route YouTube and we're just gonna ask for some kind of information. And the key philosophy that we're following here is if you have an application, a SPA application or a Blazor application, to be secure, you are rolling that backend and your SPA application does not make calls to the YouTube API directly. You are doing it through your API. Your backend makes calls to the YouTube API. Your SPA makes calls to your backend. It does not go directly. So that's what this is meant to represent. Let's put a semicolon over here. To make a call to the YouTube API, we will need an HTTP client. So let's go to services and add an HTTP client. I'm not going to have a typed client. We will inject HTTP client factory. So let's call it a client factory. We will have an HTTP client to make the call to YouTube, but we will have to get the token from somewhere. We're going to store our token in the database, so we will need a database. Let's create a public class database, and some of you are going to be like, Anton, this is illegal. I'm going to say, yes, it is. No, this is fully legal C# code, right? Here's our database. Let's go to services and we're going to add a singleton. Just going to add our database, right? And that's what we will inject. DB. Perfect. We have the HTTP client, we have the database. The one thing that we're missing is the user. So I'm gonna grab the HTTP context over here. We will var user, go to context, get the user, and the user should have our user ID. So user, find first value of user ID, and this will give us a user ID. From our database, we should be able to extract a user ID. This will get us an access token. We will need to convert it to strings because we're storing objects, and let's actually just put string here, why not? Once we have the access token, we can go ahead and put it into the client. So we will take the client factory, create ourselves a client, and before we start writing out the requests, right, this is already assuming we went through the authentication flow with YouTube, we obtained the token. We're not there yet. We haven't even finished setting up the authentication schema here, right? So this is all hypothetical for now in this handler. And in fact, we don't even want to be able to reach this unless we have a token. How do we represent if we have a token or not? Well, since it's a problem of authorization, we should be able to use authorization mechanisms. Let's do exactly that. We'll go to Builder Services and go to Authorization. Here in the builder, we are going to add a policy, and this is going to say that we are YouTube enabled. And then we're going to have a policy builder over here, semicolon. With the policy builder, we want to be authenticated with our cookie. We are not authenticating with YouTube, right? So add authentication schemas. We are looking for a cookie authentication schema. And then we will also require a claim. This will just be YouTube token. Do we have a YouTube token? And we will look for a value like yes, we do have a YouTube token. Then also require authenticated user, just to be sure. Let's grab our policy, YouTube enabled. There we go. We will go to our YouTube endpoint and we're going to require authorization for YouTube enabled. There will be a catch here that we're going to analyze a little bit, but what we're doing here is we're protecting this endpoint to basically say if you do not have this YouTube token enabled claim, which we're not setting by default, then you're not allowed to visit this endpoint. Now, let's finally go over this add auth. Over here, I'm going to add that this is YouTube options, and in these options, we will specify first our client ID. We'll take it from secrets, client ID, semicolon, and then there's going to be client secret. Set it to the client secret. Just from the beginning, I'm going to say save tokens false, and we will sign in with the cookie authentication schema. Again, if you don't understand what I'm doing here, please watch the previous video in the playlist. Now for the core endpoints, the authorization endpoint and the token endpoint, let's go ahead and grab those. When you land on the YouTube API documentation, you look through it. What kind of auth flow are you using? We're using the server-side Webflow. Let's open it up, look through the tables of contents and obtaining auth access token. And apologies, maybe if it's a little bit too small. Here is the initial auth to endpoint that we want. Let's grab that. Let's go over here, authorization endpoint, assign it, come back to the browser, and now scroll down for the token endpoint. It's going to be in the exchange authorization code and refresh section. There we have it. Come back. Let's go ahead and set the token endpoint. Right over here, semicolon. And of course, let's not forget about the callback path, which we've set, and I've completely forgot what it was. Let's open this up and grab the callback path. Come back over here, place it, and there we have it, minimal setup. Now, let's try to just use it, see what kind of user experience we have, and this is what we will work on, because primarily I think here what you want to get right is the user experience. Let's see what is happening. We're on our page, let's say we're not authenticated, we land on the application and we attempt to use the YouTube info endpoint, right? So we're gonna try to call this endpoint right here. Let's go. And it's a 404 because what I'm running here is not a hot module replaced or no hot reload thing. There we have it. So again, let's try to navigate over here. And first of all, because we don't have a cookie, we're not authenticated, we get redirected to the login page. Let's assume that we want to land on a nice login page. We want to configure that. We're going to go to the options. We're going to say that login path is going to be at /login. However, when we land on there, we're gonna authenticate automatically. Again, I will restart the app. Let's land on YouTube info again. So we land on access denied again. However, we are with a cookie. Let's clear it. Let's go to the network tab and let's see what is actually going on. I'm gonna close this down. We're gonna go to YouTube, or actually clear it, YouTube info. We go to the info page. We say, okay, you need to go to the login page. We go to the login page. It's found. We get a token. It's set right over here and we get redirected back to YouTube info. We go back to YouTube info with our cookie. It is being attached right over here and we get access denied. What is actually happening? The reason we get access denied is because we are not holding this claim. Now, speaking from the perspective of a user experience, you have some kind of service. I authenticate with your service. I may authenticate with YouTube and then you short circuit the whole thing. Over here, we're learning about a different thing, right? You give the user some kind of authentication mechanism. I input my credentials, I get a token, and then I need to connect my YouTube account with your application. Does that happen instantly? Do I need to press a button? In this case, what we're gonna say is first, you need to sign up with us, you need to log in, and then if again you hit this unauthorized endpoint, you're not pressing a button to enable integration. So we're not like spraying if statements all over the place. We are just gonna go and redirect you to login straight away. For this, we can find one of the events, which is going to be on access denied. This is gonna have a context and we can return task complete async. And if context, we have access to the request and we have the path and starts with segment. So if we start with YouTube, we can go ahead and redirect to this authentication flow. And the way that we redirect is on the context, we can find the HTTP context, and then we call challenge async. What are we challenging? We're challenging the YouTube authentication schema. Because this is a task and we need to return a task, let's just make sure that we return a task over here. And because this delegate, if I open it up, it has some base functionality. I want to preserve that base functionality. So I'm just going to place it over here before I reassign it. And then if we don't hit this endpoint, I'm just going to re-trigger it over here. Okay. And I need to pass the context as well. Let's place a breakpoint over here. I'm going to restart my debugger. Here we are. Let's clear our cookie. We're going to go to YouTube info again. YouTube info. Here we're hitting the breakpoint on the YouTube path. Now you may think that we're meant to hit it twice. We hit it once without a cookie, we go to login, and then we hit it a second time. This is not hitting it the first time, this is hitting it the second time. The reason we're hitting it the second time is that is when we're access denied. We know who you are, but you're not allowed. This is not having access. If you're just not authenticated, you're going to get redirected to login. For that, there is a separate event, so redirect to login. Okay, so let's get rid of that. Let's play that. And here in the browser, we get an invalid request because I haven't requested any scope, which is fine. This is why with documentation, you read through all of it. You don't just go, skimming a little bit. So here we have scopes. I will find YouTube read-only scope. So let's grab this whole thing, come back to the application. I will hide the debug terminal. For scopes that we're going to be requesting, let's clear all of them because Microsoft includes some default scopes. And then we will add this scope for reading YouTube information. Let's rerun our application. Here we have it. Let's again go to YouTube info, hit the breakpoint, and here I can choose my account to sign in with. The app is not yet verified, but I know what I'm doing, so I'm going to continue and allow my information to be handled there. Now, I'm hitting the breakpoint again because, again, I'm access denied. Nothing has changed about my sign-in session. Nothing in here said, go ahead and add this YouTube token claim to my authentication session, right? That is not happening. How do we do it? Let's go ahead and stop the debugger. In the previous video, we've learned about events and basically intercepting, or I gave you hints basically where you can save tokens to the database, and that is at the create ticket stage where everything is ready, we're ready to go. We can start creating a ticket over here and you get a context with all the rest of the information right over here. Let's go back to the handler. I will close all of this. We will go to events on creating ticket. This is gonna have a new context. For now, let's return task completed. And what we really want is the database first. Okay, so we will take the token and store it in the database. On the context, we have access to the HTTP context, and if you don't know yet, on the HTTP context you have request services. All your services that are registered are available from your HTTP context. We're gonna get required service and we're gonna get our database. Perfect. Here we have our database. We also want to go to the HTTP context and get our claims principal, right? This is our user, and I'm gonna go ahead and grab the user ID straight away. So find first value, user ID. Let's stop right here. I will place a breakpoint and we're gonna run into an issue, which I'm gonna show you how to solve, and I'm gonna explain the reason for why it's happening before we start writing out the rest. Let's rerun the application. On YouTube info, let's refresh. I'm going to remove this breakpoint from the on redirect access denied, run. On YouTube side, sign in. And here we're hitting the breakpoint for the on creating ticket. We have our database service, which is, no surprise. The big surprise here is that the user ID is going to be null. Why is the user ID null? Well, the user that we have isn't actually authenticated. It does have an identity, but it has, let's say, a dummy identity. And we don't actually have any claims. What is happening? Now, you need to understand that what you're dealing with here with this add auth is an authentication handler. This authentication handler will get triggered on this callback path before other authentication sessions are loaded. And the way that the authentication session gets loaded is by using an authentication handler provider. That is what the authentication service is going to be using internally. The reason we're not using the authentication service is because it actually has some caching internally, so it's going to mess everything up. So we don't want to use that. We want to use the authentication handler provider. So here we're going to yet again stop the application. We're going to get another service and we're going to get an authentication handler provider. Let's say auth handler provider. Grab this. I know this is kind of bleeding off screen, but we want to get a handler. From the context, let's get the HTTP context, which is one of the parameters, and then we want to get a cookie. So we are loading up the current authentication session from the cookie. This is going to return an auth result, which you can check. So if auth result successful, and this is asynchronous, so let's await on this first. And this is where we're turning this asynchronous and no longer need to return that. Let's check if it's been, so this is actually a handler. And then on the handler, we want to authenticate async. So authenticate async is actually going to be loading the session. The provider, a handler provider, gives you handlers. Okay, so we want to get a handler for this authentication schema. We get a handler and then we authenticate. The handler is the thing that loads up your authentication session. Sorry for that mistake, but here we should have the authentication result where we should be able to see if it was successful or not. If it's not been successful, we can return and on the context say that we have failed, and the reason failed authentication, right? So we have failed cookie authentication. Otherwise, we should have our claims principal from the authentication result, right? Principal, it's right over there. And this principal is where we're going to be getting the user ID from. Once we have this principal, let's go to the database, enter the user ID key and assign the token. So context, access token, call your save changes async. And now the final thing that you want to do, you want to give it this claim with a yes. For this, we're going to go to the context, we're going to get our principal, and this is going to be a copy of the current principal. So I'm just going to clone it. We have a copy, so in case something else mutates this wherever else, we don't care. You can obviously omit this step, but I'm not going to. Principal, identities, we want to get our identity for authentication type of cookie, because again, you may have multiple ones. It's a list. You may just grab first and be okay. For this identity, we want to add a claim. New claim, YouTube token, and then give it a Y flag. And that's it. So the claims principle that we loaded from our cookie authentication session, we're going to override the principle on the context. With that principle, we're going to add this cookie to it. And I guess let's go through the source code again. In the authentication handler, by the end of this function call, when the ticket is returned, and then if we come back to the top, right over here, so this is going to be that handle request result, which is going to contain the ticket. So again, coming back over here to the auth handler, where we're creating the ticket, where we have overridden the claims principle, that ticket is going to get placed inside the handle request result. Now, a big point on this section is you can have handle, you can have skipped, you can have none, which is just going to short circuit everything, and you're not going to go down this branch where finally from that ticket, you're going to sign in under your sign-in schema with the principle that you have specified on that ticket context. What we're effectively doing is trying to hit this statement with the appropriate principle that we want, which is what we've done. We've taken the current authentication session, we've just added a claim, and we're attempting to re-sign in. Later on, when you re-sign in with a user that already has the appropriate claims, when you're creating your claims principle from the login, you can reattach that claim. But we're not doing that because that's going to take quite a bit of time to build out. And again, the reason I'm talking about this section over here, where you can basically return a handled or a skipped, if you override auth handler and you get back a success, you can actually take all of the logic that we placed over here and implement your own version of the auth handler. Whatever is contained in that ticket, go ahead and amend it, and then return a handled, and then sign in with whatever schema that you want, if you want to sign in with it, right? So the option to override the whole flow and how this authentication handler works is still there. As long as you understand how it works, it is very easy to go and do it. It's taking me 30-40 minutes because I'm sitting here rumbling on a video, but if I would be doing it myself, it would be like a 10-minute job and it's done. Anyway, here's the final thing. Let's rerun the debugger. I'm going to come back over here. I will place a breakpoint on this endpoint so we know when we're entering it. And we can place a breakpoint on line 43 just so, in case anything unexpected happens. Going to YouTube info, sign in with my account. Here is our authentication result. Looks to be successful. Let's keep going. And we've entered the fail clause, classical mistake. If not success, then we have failed authentication. Let's retry. Here we are again. Here we have the claims principle. Let's inspect it. What do we look for? We're looking for having any claims. There are no claims. Why? And here we can see the authentication type YouTube. So this is unfortunately a little debugging error, because what has happened is from previous attempts, the cookies were created successfully. And this cookie actually contains a YouTube authentication schema, which we are going to clear for now. Close this tab, rerun our application. Here we go. And again, YouTube info, again, sign in. Here we are. Let's get past this. Here we have a claims principle. Let's verify that we have our user ID. There we have it. So the identity that we have is a cookie identity. Again, the reason we had YouTube before is because this middleware has ran successfully and we have signed in under the YouTube authentication schema. Playing that through, I am now hitting the YouTube info endpoint, and if I extract the user, let's take a look at the claims. We should be able to, just have them. There we go. We have the YouTube claim, we have re-signed in, and the identity is still cookie. So sorry, the authentication type is still cookie. Now I'm gonna stop the application and we're gonna complete that call to this YouTube information endpoint. Let's drop this down. From the client that we have created, we wanna send a sync, a new HTTP request message. This is going to be a request, which is gonna go to get and the user information endpoint. I'm gonna need to grab this user information endpoint from calling API example. Here we have the host, so HTTPS, Google domain, and then the route. Place that on the end here. Finally, the headers, authorization header will be a new blah 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 header. Bearer. we want to supply the access token. Using request message, give it the request message. You're gonna get the response, which we wanna wait for. Actually convert this function to be asynchronous. And finally, return. We wanna response content read as string async. And await on this as well. The response should also go in a using statement, and there we have it. So let's spread this out a little bit. I'll drop down the solution explorer. So we get the user ID. Based on the user ID, we can extract the access token, we create our HTTP client, and we execute whatever request. Now for the logic over here, you gotta use your programming skills, design patterns to basically say, look, I want to execute this piece of logic before I make any requests. And then you don't need to repeat this everywhere in your code. If you don't know how to do this, go watch my design pattern videos, come back. But for fun and games, we're gonna use a claims principle to try to load the token into the user before doing this request, right? Not something that I would recommend you do, but we will do it for educational purposes. First of all, let's go ahead and see this work. We're going to come back to the website, and actually I will need to start the debugger again. While that's starting, I am going to clear the session. We are going to sign in, go to the login page, get redirected, sign in with my YouTube account. I'll remove this breakpoint from the onCreating ticket and play through. I will also remove the breakpoint from here because I don't want to show my access token and play through. Come back to the browser, and here we have the user information. We've successfully extended our application by delegating authorization, and then we were able to further delegate the authorization to our own endpoints. Now for the fun bit, let's go ahead and stick this in a claims transformation. So class YouTube token claims transformation. Claims transformation. We're gonna implement an interface. There we go. We will need to inject a couple of things. Well, maybe not a couple, just a database. So DB right there. Let's take about yay much, place it over here. We already have the user, which is the principal over here. If DB contains the key of user ID, that means we have the access token. And the simpler thing would probably be to say no here. So if we don't contain anything, let's just go ahead and pass the principal on, because we have to return a task from result, pass on the principal, get rid of all the unused code. Otherwise, get the access token. We want to get our new CP, and why am I writing over there? We'll do the same thing. What's it called? Clone. Go back up here. Let's grab this code that we're doing here all the way back down here. Say YouTube access token, dashes and underscores. People are gonna be angry with this, promise you. We are getting this from the CP, from the thing that we've copied, and at the end, return task from result. We want to return CP. Get rid of this thing here. Let's spread this out a little bit, and there we have it. Now we just want an access token over here. Var access token equals context, a user, find first value, YouTube dash access, triple C there, that could have been bad, but yeah, there we have the access token. Let's rerun the debugger, come back to YouTube info, refresh, and unfortunately it looks like we're missing a proper key. Let's check this out. Copy the claim name and place a breakpoint over here. I will just repaste the claim name so I know I'm not going crazy. Database, we don't actually need it there. Come back, give it a refresh. Obviously the breakpoint is not being triggered because we are not actually registering this. So with claims transformations, you gotta register them. So add transient claims transformation. Let's add this here, a rerun. So that's hit the breakpoint. We don't care too much about it. Let's go actually remove it because I'm confident it's working now. Let's give this a refresh. Clearly not working as intended. Let's give this another go here. So we hit this breakpoint and we're exiting the application because it's an in-memory database. So we have to clear, refresh, re-sign in. So let me just exit over here, re-sign in with YouTube. And there we have it, user information attached from a claims principal. A bit of a bumpy ride, but that is what you get when you're working with an in-memory database. Hopefully everybody has enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy it, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, click the bell notification. If you have any questions, leave it in the comment section. If you want to say thank you, you can also leave it in the comment section or come say thank you on my Discord server, but better yet, come support me on my Patreon. Very big thank you to all of my patrons that are already supporting me. Your help is very much appreciated. Hope you're having a good day, and goodbye.